My name is Dr. Karuna Ramanathan. I am a strategic organizational development consultant. I currently operate as an independent consultant, but prior to this, for about 3 years, I was in government as the most senior principal organizational development consultant. And prior to that, I was in leadership development in the military. Before that, as a naval officer for 19 years. Well, I stumbled upon it as I became curious, having been developed as a leader in the military, as to how teams became effective. And I realized that it's one thing to look at teams, but it's also the impact that effective teams had on organizations. I then became curious as to how organizations could change fast to be able to be more profitable and successful. I realized then, over the years, that there were a lot of issues, external and internal, that impacted on the way organizations actually function, and it was not black or white. A lot of that gray would have to be examined from a behavioral lens, and hence I got interested in organizational development. Well, in this current age, quite characterized, some people call it the VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. I just like to think that we are in an age of massive disruption. Now, it's not that organizations have not been disrupted before through the ages. Well, it's very simply that organizations are facing very rapid disruptions, and a lot of it has to do with technology and the way it's scaling itself through. So whether we like it or not, we are going to be increasingly facing challenges at having to adopt technology quite so quickly. And the challenge inside organizations today is not so much the adoption of technology, which tends to be a project management outlook, but more the adaptation to that technology, which then means the internalization of those benefits and how those benefits actually scale quite quickly for profit and productivity. Now, this sounds very long-winded, but in a nutshell, it simply means we need to support leaders, teams, and groups through change. And external organizational development consultants can do that quite so quickly because they don't have a vested interest in how things pan out and can offer fully their services and their outside-in look with best practices as well to help leaders actually do this quite so quickly. Well, as a strategic OD consultant, I personally don't just focus on the workforce. And I am aware that a lot of how OD is developed so far has to do with groups and the workforce. I believe that OD has to be linked up to how strategy is developed and implemented, and more so how leadership teams actually work, the senior as well as the middle managers, and also how systems and structures, or what we call organization design, is actually effected within organizations. Now, it's not as if we're going to be transforming every few years. The reality in many organizations today, at least the ones that I'm working with, is that the change is becoming continuous and transformation is a journey rather than a one-stop pit every 5 years. So to help them then, I pay attention to 4 areas as a strategic OD consultant: strategy, leadership, systems and structures, and the workforce. And I believe all 4 need to be in concert so that effective change can actually materialize quite quickly. There is a heightened sense today that work is interconnected and interrelated. It is a function of complexity that we are seeing in the workplace. Now with that then, there's a need for collaboration, there's a need for role clarity, there's a need for relationships in teams, there's a need for certain working rules, there's also a need to be very results focused, and that's really where teams need to be built. It's not as straightforward as simply hoping that a group can become a team. Psychologists have known this all the while, for a long time, that teams needed work to be built. But I'm challenging even that. We build teams so that the teams can learn faster, and learning is probably a very important requirement today to be able to navigate complexity and to have some confidence in uncertainty. Therefore, teams are very important, in my opinion, in the context of the work I do with organizational change today. We run the risk of reacting to a symptom. And actually, we may have to take a more holistic view to how certain factors might be impacting the system and the implications and the consequences of those actions on the larger system. Because organizations increasingly have to collaborate today and co-create outcomes with various stakeholders and partners and clients, there's a lot more going on outside the organization that will impact the organization, such that we could almost say organizations today are probably in more open systems than in the past. Now that would mean a systems view could help organizations appreciate the whole complex range of external and internal forces and allow for it to focus and prioritize its actions such that this multiply its effects and actually allow for some first successes to be seen. So hence a systems view would allow for that deeper appreciation instead of just thinking in silos or thinking at one level. Now, it is easier said than done again. A lot of us default to that because we simply want to get on with the day and complete our work. But a systems view would actually ensure that we differentiate between managing the work, leading the people, building the organization, and finally influencing and growing the total system. Successful organizations today have far more impact in larger systems than they just do within the organization. I've long been a student of it. I'm intrigued by the way change occurs in organizations. I believe we should not be managing change. I know it's a very radical view, but you can't manage something that is so complex and inherently human. There is a human side to change. People change. Work does not change. You manage work. So what organizational development does, it helps us appreciate people as they are. Human beings can be human, and we can be a lot more sensitive to how they need to be supported through change. And that would probably relate to concepts like productivity, innovation, and a certain sense of fulfillment at work, as opposed to just coming in to do what's required of you and going off. We left the factory age long ago. Today it's all about us finding fulfillment at work. Some associate that with happiness, but I'm not so sure that that cuts for everybody. So a leader's role, and this is not what I said, I've read it somewhere quite recently, a leader's role is to ignite that purpose in people so that they believe that whatever they are doing at work is much higher than what they can possibly achieve, and it is worth doing for the future. And that's really where organizational development and leadership work that I do with my clients tends to focus on. In my profession, at my level, where I operate at a whole of systems level, it is sometimes very challenging to undertake diagnosis. There is a view that you can actually conduct diagnosis simply by studying data and information existing in the organization. But when anxiety and unhappiness mounts in a system that is undergoing change and transformation, very often there is a need to dig into perspectives that people hold for whatever reason, and to manage those perspectives, one in relation to the other, but in relation to the larger system, such that a deeper understanding of why things are the way they are would probably feature in what then can happen. So in my work, I actually struggle a bit with that, especially when I have to quickly work individually and in groups with people to kind of examine their working narratives. Once I've put that together and we have worked that with the leadership, there may or may not be the courage and the effort to want to shift that narrative. Now, if the narrative is to be shifted, then it works very well. And by the way, what I've just explained is probably the gist of Dialogic OD, which is socially constructed reality, social constructivism. But when the leaders realize that it's a lot more at stake, and sometimes this can be very tricky, there may or may not be the will to want to take the next step, and that to me is a major challenge in the work that I do, knowing very well that the change is difficult, and the issues go far deeper than it appears on the surface. A good leader is simply someone who would influence someone else to do something that he or she would otherwise not want to do. Now that influence can be in the form of inspiration, it can be in the form of motivation, it can be the form of promotion, it could be in the form of just support. But leadership is by very nature influence. It is not power. It is manifested in power and is expected as an outcome in power. But by its raw definition, leadership is about influence. And influence does not necessarily have to have power associated with it, though strong influence can result in power. So a good leader is someone who will influence someone else to do good. We have many cases of leaders who influence people to do all kinds of things, but someone else to do good. Leaders actually serve others and the larger system. Good leaders do not serve themselves. I would live my life all over again in the same way as I've lived it. I think every day is a learning day. The issue is whether we consciously attend to that learning such that it doesn't pan out as regrets, but as important lessons learned. And staying true to the core has always been very important to me. Even in the silliest things I've done, I have tried my best to be intentional. And I make no excuses for some of it that's obviously gone awfully wrong, but there are no regrets. If I was 19 again, I would join the Navy. If I was 30 over years old, I would still want to work on ships. If I was 40, I'd still want to lead men and women. And if I was 50, I'd still want to do organizational development. And I'm where I am today because I pretty much want to be where I am today. So that's the advice I would give to many young people starting out. Stay true, stay full to your cause, and do not compromise. It is one thing not to know what you want to do, but it's another thing to actually do what you want to do. I've always been fascinated by Simon Sinek's work. He's American and he spoke of leaders leading, they eat last, but you can watch all that on YouTube. What I'm reading right now is a profound work by Nassim Taleb, who actually in a 2018 book talks about skin in the game. And I think that is very much a leadership requirement. The question is, do you have skin in this game to want to make a fundamental difference and impact in your work such that it benefits not just you and the people around you, but the larger system? And I've been quite affected by that the last few weeks because I think we are having a lot of noise and a lot of opinion in our systems, and we need to really ask ourselves whether we actually have an opportunity to provide insight. And that's kept me quite occupied for the last few weeks.